everyone. Thank you so much for having me today. It's such an honor to speak alongside so many incredibly talented minds. My name is Mikaela Stafford. I'm a visual artist based here in Melbourne. And at the moment, my work is primarily digitally based in 3D motion graphics. But over the years, I've kind of worked in a variety of physical and virtual projects spanning across digital sculpture, installation, digital makeup, digital fashion, VR, and commercial projects alongside my own personal art kind of practice in gallery and public art contexts. But in this presentation, I'll be focusing on the ways that I think bioaesthetics in digital art can be a catalyst for a more diverse, progressive, and creatively sustainable society. I really believe it's a perfect medium for collaboration and the cross-pollination of ideas, which is particularly important for me as my work kind of explores themes of speculative futures and is focused on the complex relationships between humans, technology, and nature. I'm really interested in exploring kind of the ongoing challenges and opportunities that we're going to continue to face in a cyber-physical future. And so today, throughout this presentation, I'm going to give you a bit of an insight into my background and how I got into 3D. I'll be discussing how I developed personal style and some of my research interests and how they motivate my practice, the kind of symbolism and repeated motifs found in my work, and I'll be sharing some examples of my commercial projects that I do alongside my personal art practice. And we'll end it by touching on kind of what's happening at the moment and what lies ahead. But I suppose it's important to kind of identify the intention of my work and for this presentation, which is to offer an optimistic lens for the future and demonstrate the versatility of 3D motion graphics and the ways it can be adapted across a wide range of projects and contexts. And so a bit about my background. When I finished school, I definitely wanted to be an artist, but definitely lacked the kind of confidence to pursue that journey. So I thought kind of taking up a more responsible or safe option of being a curator was probably a safer bet, which in hindsight is equally as precarious, but anyway. So I started doing art history and was doing that for a little bit and kind of realized that that wasn't really fulfilling for me. So then I made a very dramatic declaration to friends and family that I was becoming an artist and I was going to art school. So I did that at Sydney College of the Arts, which was a contemporary art school. And during that time, I did my honours in painting. And then simultaneously, as I was doing that, I was curating and project managing a gallery space inside a nightclub on Oxford Street. And for context, it was kind of a 5 by 5 meter glass cube. And on each side, there was the two different clubs. So I was programming late night exhibitions every week. And during that time, I was introduced and programming a lot of drag performances, installations, lighting designers, multimedia artists, and kind of started to have a better understanding of like how those kind of spaces within the kind of like art sphere were operating and kind of considered light in ways that I hadn't really thought about before, given that it was kind of underground and a nighttime context. And yeah, I guess being inside a music venue, there's a lot of projections happening at that time. And so that was kind of the genesis of my animation journey, because I would put my paintings into PowerPoint and put them on a crossfade and then project them onto the wall, which is pretty funny thinking about that now, I suppose. But I guess when I started doing that, I guess I was kind of frustrated with kind of like how projections were looking on a flat wall the same way that I was kind of frustrated with painting at the time. I felt like the two-dimensionality, the flatness of canvas just kind of wasn't working for me anymore. And so I started to make various kind of white sculptures in various sizes that I would start suspending and projecting onto. And then, yeah, that's kind of like how I started to think about three-dimensional form and sculpture. and lighting design. And so during this time, I also dabbled in my performance art moment, which is like so cringe to think about, but here it is. And again, like looking back on it now, I can kind of see the genesis of kind of like a style starting to evolve, but not really knowing how or where to put it or how to bring it together. But I guess it makes sense down the track. And so having been kind of in this club context, things kind of naturally kind of started to grow from there. So initially I was working mostly for like various like festivals, nightclubs, raves and whatever, and it was a pretty fun and crazy time. But having like branched outside the cube and kind of making these like larger installations like the one here that ended up being 30 meters long, outside in festival in regional Victoria. This was also the time that I kind of started to begin my kind of obsession and fixation on orbs and water and refraction. But I suppose I kind of had to start thinking and working and considering space in new and exciting and challenging ways. Especially because the budgets at this time were very modest, so I learned how to be quite resourceful. But yeah, I guess like, again, there's like kind of like a style, like a visual language slowly starting to come through. But during this time, I was kind of either hand drawing or having ideas in my mind that I then had to like fabricate and build myself and install and then take down, and I kind of got in this loop of doing a couple of installations a week and was kind of like on this wheel that I couldn't kind of get off. And I knew something needed to change because I couldn't maintain the kind of way that I was working at the time. But I didn't know how else to stop, because I technically at that point was an art school graduate with like no real like kind of specialized skills, but like kind of a jack of all trades. But then that's when lockdown kicked in. And I think, like most people, I had the initial meltdown and freak out and didn't know what I was going to do, because I knew events weren't really right for me anymore. But, fortunately, I was lucky enough to receive JobKeeper at the time. And so I knew having forced time off with government support, this was kind of like a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. And so it was time for another dramatic declaration, and that was that I was going to become a 3D animator, which at the time is kind of like crazy. I think my naivety at the time actually really served me well, because I think if I had kind of an understanding of the kind of gravity and the scope of how much there was to learn, how much it was going to cost, how hard it was going to be, like I'm not sure if I would have started it in the first place, but I like to think I would have, but you never know. But I guess at this time I wasn't using any design programs, and so I knew it was going to be a challenging process. So I taught myself Adobe and Cinema at the same time on YouTube. I also didn't have any friends or really any connection to the industry, so it was pretty intimidating at the time. But my kind of thinking was that if I had the skills to be able to 3D model and build, I would be able to develop more complex and ambitious stage designs that I could pitch to local and international clients, and I would be able to kind of like remove myself from the actual physical build of things. But as I kind of got more familiar with it, with the programs and how they worked, I kind of intuitively started to pick up a style. And instead of using it in such like a practical sense, perhaps it was more about an artistic kind of pursuit. And so, yes, it was also like during this time kind of being forced to be isolated and focused and nowhere else to be, and treating it like a full-time job Monday to Saturday. It kind of ended up being this kind of like terrarium that I kind of like created around my mind, and I put all of my energy into these imaginary kind of environments that I was starting to build, because it kind of was like a place for my mind to go, which I think at the time was really necessary. And these two artworks that you can see here are the two of the first ones that I ever shared online, which who's really sweet. But again, it's interesting to observe the kind of visual language that kind of exists consciously and subconsciously in our minds. And it looks a lot like the paintings that I was doing when I was at art school, and it still looks like a lot of the work that I do now. But yes, as you can see from my past, I've always been quite drawn to the spatial, the biomorphic, the vibrant and the playful, which is why this kind of infinite void of virtual space was super attractive to me. But a personal style that was really centered around the natural became really apparent, and creating these kind of hypothetical subaquatic environments became my escape, and it was really a way to explore parts of my imagination that I didn't really have access to, and I was genuinely really surprised about what I was able to create, having not been limited by kind of sight or gravity or material limitations that kind of exist in the real world that had always been such a frustration for me, because things had always gone wrong when it had come to real life installations, whether it be timelines or things not arriving on time or just things not falling in the same way. I felt quite liberated by being able to having the choice that if you worked hard enough, you could probably figure out what you needed to do. And so for this kind of first year that I was, developing personal style and kind of establishing myself in the space, I was kind of really focusing on the what I was making. But then eventually this kind of rolled over into the why. And I guess this question was a lot harder to answer in a succinct way than I realized. And some of the questions that I was asking myself was kind of why is what I'm doing important? Who is this helping, and what impact is this having, and where is this all going? And then I think these questions were especially important for me at the time, because I think I felt like I had entered the space much later in life than a lot of my peers, and I was kind of interested as to why this was a suddenly new obsession. And that kind of reflection kind of made me really try to refine what my values and interests are in my practice. And a research area that's really captivated my attention is called technobiophilia. Biophilia being the innate human tendency to seek connections with nature and other living systems, as we have a very instinct bond with the environment and an inherent desire to have proximity to it, to interact with it and to be immersed by it. And so I think this kind of inherent curiosity is super fascinating and is something that unifies us, but unfortunately sometimes divides us. And also kind of considering the ways that technology plays a part in these relationships. So I suppose the kind of overarching kind of philosophy surrounding technobiophilia that really aligns with me is kind of the exploration and trying to find harmonious ways to integrate the natural and virtual worlds and kind of celebrate the love of living organisms and emerging technology. And this theme kind of provides a really effective basis for maintaining and developing a more symbiotic and mutually sustainable relationship between these kind of two somewhat opposing realms. And we have so much to learn from nature and also from tech. So I think kind of easing the tensions between these two kind of leaves so much room for potential. And I do think that this kind of work is significant because it is intended to challenge our preconceived notions of what the future of digital art may look like, and kind of provokes critical thinking about the ways in which technology shapes our world, making it an important vehicle for social commentary and cultural critique. And so with all of this in mind, I'm going to share and just kind of brush over some commercial projects that I've done as a freelancer over the last year or two, that I've kind of had these ideas mulling in the back of my mind and finding a way to kind of compromise my own visual language in with brands individually, and the ways that I've kind of justified abstraction and introduced kind of storytelling through texture. So this was the Nike campaign that I did earlier this year in collaboration with Harrods, which was an interesting challenge because, maybe I can turn this down. Oh, it's okay, I'll keep talking over it. an interesting challenge because the brief itself was very minimal and very drawn back, which I think was unusual for me, being more on the maximalist side of life. But I took it on and I tried to think about the ways that like my work can kind of relate to what they were after. So I introduced these kind of grey rubbery textures to kind of speak to the sole of a shoe, and these kind of metallic reflections that kind of exaggerated the kind of curvature of the form, that again was speaking to kind of the metal hardware that you find in a lot of Nike products. And whenever I think of, you know, Nike, it's always somebody kind of in motion. And so this was also my first time having a proper crack at cloth simulations, which we love. And so that is again like how I was kind of trying to speak to body, which kind of came together in the end, which was exciting. And then there was the Mecca campaign, which is probably one of my favorite commercial projects and was actually my first kind of larger scale project, I suppose, that I had done. And their creative team is so awesome and were so trusting and open-minded from the get-go. And I unfortunately naively thought that that's how every project was going to be, but it's not. But yeah, we started by doing all of the shop fronts across Australia and New Zealand, so dealing with all the static assets first. And the campaign was called Future Beautiful, so kind of speaking to these kind of future-facing ingredients and ointments that they were launching for the store. And so that's why I kind of started to think about the way that ointments drip and kind of each drop having its own kind of world within inside it, and thinking about the ways that we could integrate kind of the sophistication of the Mecca sphere with this kind of more futuristic style or vision for the brand. And so by kind of incorporating the very red and pink Mecca branding, I wanted to kind of add on the extra kind of like gold elements to speak to that kind of opulence and sophistication. And then after we had signed that off and everything went really smoothly, it was time to move on to the motion piece. And at this point I was feeling pretty confident because everything had gone really well. They were happy for me to go free rein and just kind of like make whatever I wanted to do. And so I spent weeks creating this world. And I was so excited to send it off. And I did, and I waited a couple of days and I hadn't heard from them, and everybody knows that feeling of waiting for the feedback, especially when you're like hoping it's going to be good. And then eventually the email came in and was like, "Hey Mikaela, like we love what you've done, but," and I was like, "No." But I'd gone rogue. I kind of went off the color scheme that we had built and the vision and style that we had. And this, again, because I hadn't had any experience working in commercial campaigns before, I didn't have a background in advertising or marketing. I didn't really maybe ask the questions either as to kind of what was required. I think there was a bit of assumed knowledge, which is really fair. So definitely missed the mark on that one. So after we'd kind of established that that wasn't going to be able to go ahead, I had 6 days to get the animation for the final edit done, which I did. And this is how it came together. Thank you. And I suppose when I was kind of thinking about the conceptual ideas for that project, whenever I'm thinking about something in the future, in my mind, I kind of understand the future as a place, as a destination. It's something that we're trying to work towards, which is why I kind of built an environmental space, and kind of I often explore the duality of the kind of macro and micro components of a world. So I often do a lot of camera fly-throughs, so it gives a viewer and an audience a sense of exploration. And then as much as you kind of observe the outside, you then become kind of an inhabitant of a space. And I think that's definitely a really important way that I kind of integrate placemaking within my animation work. And so this is the next campaign that I did for OPI, and OPI invited myself and I think 5 other artists to work on this project. And again, like another super open brief. We just had to make the same artwork in 3 colorways. And so I kind of wanted to play around with this idea of making something that was kind of really beautiful but disgusting at the same time, just creating some visual tension in that way, and thinking about, I was looking at my fingertips a lot while making this and kind of trying to make it as like abstract and bizarre as possible. But again, I suppose I really enjoyed this journey and this process, similar to kind of how Colin was talking earlier today about how important play is. And I kind of, because I didn't have any borders, you know, I kind of was free to kind of do whatever I wanted. And at the time, a lot of the work that I was making was kind of built in or approached in a more sculptural way. And I integrated the product by having the kind of dripping nail polish. But this piece in particular was a really fun way to kind of push the limits of what I think and how far abstraction can go when relating it to kind of commercial projects. And so having done a few of those on my own, I was lucky enough to be approached by Jackie Winter and have been represented by them for almost a year now. And it's been really great having representation and to have a team to kind of bounce ideas around and have like a clearer understanding of what the industry standard is, what rates are when you kind of are in having problems with different clients. You know, having somebody to bounce ideas of how to manage that has been really valuable and really helpful. And it's nice to have somebody kind of in your kind of corner and dealing with the comms that we know is always so time and energy consuming. So that's been a really helpful support network that I've had over the last year, and I would recommend if you're kind of freelancing and feeling burnt out to kind of speak to different agencies and see what they may be able to offer you, because it's not for everyone, but I've had a good experience. And in terms of my more personal art practice, this is a recent example of kind of how I've troubleshooted a creative block. I was invited by Modern Times to contribute to a group show that's coming up on the 16th of November, if anyone's around. But the name of the exhibition is called Tracing Change, which I think is a really relevant kind of concept for us all at the moment. But like many of my projects, I don't necessarily have an end goal or end vision that I'm kind of working towards. It's more of a very intuitive kind of process. And so that often starts with kind of like a clay digital ball that's a sphere, and I kind of stretch it and pull it and manipulate it into certain ways until it kind of gets to the point that it conveys maybe the message that I discover over time, particularly when it's for my more personal works. But yeah, as you can see in the screen recording, I was kind of just spending way too long kind of navigating around it, trying to find the right angle that kind of was sitting in the right place. But it just felt too graphic. I didn't feel connected to it, so I knew that it was time to do a bit of a remix. But I knew that there was enough ingredients in the existing work that I didn't need to start from scratch. So instead of approaching it from more of a sculpture angle, I decided to think about it in more of a painterly way. And so kind of stretch things across the canvas and imagined if I was trying to do like an oil painting, how would it look? And so the name of this series is energy never dies, it just changes shape, which is part of a broader series that I'm working on, but kind of exploring this idea of, our future selves watching our current selves through memories, and memory being something that kind of comes in and out of focus and changes over time. And so I wanted to kind of convey the haziness of what that is and the kind of lucidness that memory often is and how we experience it. And once I kind of got it to these places, I definitely felt more confident and more connected to it. And so sometimes I think, if you're feeling really frustrated and you're kind of at your point, sometimes you don't need to start from scratch. You just need to step away from it and kind of approach it from a different angle. And it's because I didn't change the lighting setup. I used all of the same 3D models. It's just like a different composition. And I think changing the ideas or kind of like mediums that you would approach it as is sometimes really helpful. And another example of a project that went from render to reality was this sculptural project that I did last year. Pitch Music and Arts invited me to create a sculptural piece that needed to be up a tree because people at a festival having a good time can't be trusted. So it had to be up high and out of reach. And so this central render was just like a very quick proof of concept. But I really wanted to find a way to kind of marry my digital practice in with the kind of sculptural work. And so obviously, because of the obsession with the glass spheres and water spheres, I was like, sweet, I'm going to get these huge glass orbs and they're going to be on the sculpture and it's going to be amazing. And everyone advised me not to do it. They're like, Mick, don't get glass, get perspex, get something else, you don't need to do it. And I'm like, no, it has to be glass, otherwise the refraction won't be the same, the dispersion won't be the same, it has to be glass. And so I got them, as you can see on the left, and we 3D printed the model so that we could essentially sculpt the whole thing by eye. So we made a steel substructure and welded it together, then got recycled foam and layered that on top and sanded and painted and sanded and painted. And you can see the final product on the left. So it ended up being 4 meters tall, and it was just an absolute beast of a project. But we got it done, and it was the day to drop it to the site, but we were a few hours late because we were still drilling the glass orbs with a drill bit that was encrusted in diamonds, because that's the only thing that's sharp enough to cut solid glass, which is crazy. But when we dropped it off, the sun was starting to set, so the rigger was like, all right, we're going to have to do this tomorrow morning, so just leave it here, you can go home. So I went home, and the next morning I was getting on a flight, and as I was boarding, I got a call from the director, and I knew that it obviously wasn't going to be good news, but I really didn't want to answer, but knew that I had to, so I did, and they're like, Mick, the sculpture, and I was like, yep. And they're like, the orbs, and I was like, yep. They're like, solid glass, yeah? And I was like, yep. And they're like, direct sunlight, yeah? And I was like, yep. And so it had turned into giant magnifying glasses and was starting fires everywhere, on the mat, on the grass, disaster. But luckily, it didn't go in the tree the day before, so it's okay. Meanwhile, the flight attendant's tapping me on the shoulder, being like, excuse me, you need to get off your phone. I was like, just one second. Anyway, so luckily my friends Horan drove back to site, sandblasted them, and I was like, oh, this is okay. Nice subsurface scattering. This looks gorgeous. Perfect. And so I went off the tree, and I don't know. So consider that a cautionary tale of merging the digital with the physical. But yeah, so what's coming up next? I'm kind of just focusing more on my digital and physical sculptural practice and finding different ways to kind of create them with various biodegradable materials, whether it be algae filaments or CNC milling with found organic material. Also translating those kind of sculptural works into either VR, or this is a HoloLens collaboration that I did with Matt Hermans in Sydney, which is really exciting, and trying to find different ways to kind of integrate that. And then also doing other public art projects like the one that I did here in Acme earlier this year. I think public space is a really important component to my practice, and kind of activating underutilized space and making contemporary art really accessible is really important. You know, Australia has a long way to go in kind of developing the infrastructure to make that possible, but I really believe it's a valuable way to kind of help develop Melbourne, for example's kind of creative identity within the Australian art landscape. And alongside that, I've just started working with the Future Deluxe team in Sydney, which has been really exciting. It's my first time working in a studio, so kind of just adapting to those changes and learning a lot. But yeah, I suppose I'm really excited to work on more collaborative projects. So yeah, if anybody's doing any sculptural works, let me know. Otherwise, thank you so much.